The Rendlesham Forest incident happened in 1980, but till this day it remains one of the most talked about and often put forward as one of the most credible UFO cases that are out there that are being discussed. It's titled Britain's Roswell. I guess the newspapers titled it that at some point, but it's a huge case. It is also one of my favorite cases. I love the whole story. I love that there's so much military personnel involved. I guess that's why it is such a big case and why it enjoys so much credibility. Now in this video, I want to deep dive only into this case, and in the first part of the video, I'm going to break down the story because not everyone knows the story, so I feel obliged to tell you guys what actually happened, give a little bit of a summary. But if you're already familiar with the story of the Rendlesham Forest incident, then feel free to just skip to the second part. Use the timestamps in the video and you can just skip to the questions and answers that you want to hear, because the whole second part of this video is all about questions around the case and skeptical analysis. Okay, so let's get into the story itself. What happened? What is the Rendlesham Forest incident? Now, please keep in mind as I'm going through this, I can only give like a top-line summary of the story. There's no way for me to get into all the details of it. I mean, that 2-hour documentary is just about this incident. Books have been written, so there's a lot of detail that I can't cover here. But in a nutshell, the Rendlesham Forest was a series of reported UFO sightings of unexplained lights near Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England in December 1980. The events occurred just outside of RAF Woodbridge, which at the time was used by the United States Air Force, and around 3 a.m. on the 26th of December 1980, a security patrol near the east gate of RAF Woodbridge saw lights descending into the nearby Rendlesham Forest. Then a team of airmen, including Deputy Base Commander Lieutenant Colonel Halt, left the base to investigate and descended into the forest while Halt was using a dictaphone to record his commentary. Keep in mind, this is 1980, not everyone has a smartphone that would record. So he records his voice using this dictaphone, and that recording is in its full length. I think it's like 16 or 17 minutes, available on the Wikipedia page of the incident. So I'll link that down in the description. You can go check it out. They were also carrying an image intensifier, and you'll see later on, we'll get to that, how that becomes relevant in the story. Well, that night, those men chased a varied assortment of lights, which they described as weird phenomena. They claimed that they had encountered an alien craft, which they even established a landing site for. Following the incident, the men filed top-secret witness reports, which were strictly classified. However, later on, copies of the tape recording were leaked, and the incident attracted attention. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt also wrote a memo to the Ministry of Defense, reiterating that he believes that he witnessed an extraterrestrial event that was then covered up. So that is publicly available as well. And that is the beauty of this specific case, because it happened in 1980. A lot of it has been documented at the time, and now through the Freedom of Information Act, all the witness statements, everything has come out and is publicly available. So we have a fairly compelling picture of what happened that night and how the puzzle pieces come together. I don't think we can answer all questions in this video. Please feel free to leave your questions that you feel may have remained unanswered after completing this video down in the comment section below. It'd be great to get a conversation started and just put questions together, that people may still have. So in a very top-line nutshell, that's the story of what happened. If you still want to dive deeper before we getting into the skeptical analysis now, I'll link a video down in the description by another YouTube user that breaks the incident down in way more detail. But now we're moving forward into the questions around the case and the analysis. And the first question I want to attempt to answer is, if Halt and his team did not see a UFO or aliens, can we explain what he saw? What are the theories out there? Can we try to debunk the phenomenon, the lights they chased that night, and make sense of it? The answer to that is probably a combination of several things. At the time and the location that they claimed to have seen something descending into the forest coincided with the appearance of a bright fireball over southern England. And that is not a very rare occurrence. Here's another video of someone filming something similar. This is just debris. It could be, natural debris, like whatever, meteorites protruding into the atmosphere. It could be other pieces of space debris. And you do see this kind of stuff. It's not super unusual. And keep in mind, an incident like that was perfectly mapped onto where they were looking and saw something descending into the forest that night. Second, the senior Master Sergeant Kevin Conde has admitted that he played a prank on his fellow servicemen while on patrol at Woodbridge. This is described in detail in this now archived BBC article, and it says, Kevin Conde has said that he and another airman shined patrol car lights through the trees and made noises on the loudspeaker as a prank on a security guard nearby RAF Woodbridge in Suffolk. Mr. Conde also said it was fertile ground for a practical joke. And practical jokes are a tradition in the security police. We just drove down through the forest, flashing the lights through the fog. It wasn't a UFO, it was a 1979 Plymouth Velar. Conde also said, if they're out in the forest seeing red and blue pulsing lights and I'm back here doing this prank with red and blue pulsing lights, what else do you think they are seeing? You have to call into question the judgment of military officers in charge of a frontline base in a Cold War who can't distinguish a UFO from a bank of police car lights. Ouch. So him shining these lights up into the sky could have created the impression that mysterious beams were actually shining down from the spacecraft, because this is like in part what Colonel Halt reported. And it would explain certain lines in the transcript of Colonel Halt's tape recording where he says, and this is a quote, "Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. Look at all the colors," right? And like this is how he described it, and it's exactly what he said, because Conde stated that he was using blue and red lights on that vehicle and using the front lights, that maybe through an angle on a hill or something he managed to give the illusion of them shining upwards. But it is a fact that Kevin Conde admitted to playing this prank on the other guys at the base. There's another point. The time of the sighting, Sirius was the brightest star that night, and it was sitting just above the horizon. If you check this out, this is roughly where Sirius would be sitting. Ignore the little red circle there. But it was sitting just barely above the horizon, just on the top of the tree line, and that was the brightest star that night. Plus, you have to include factors like atmospheric distortion, where it is possible that the star was ever so slightly brighter than it usually was because it was distorted through the atmosphere. Also, this coming back to what I said in the beginning, that they were using an image intensifier because the men were carrying a so-called star scope, okay? I'm sure you've seen those before. It is a little bit like a binocular, like a one-sided binocular. But these ones have like this kind of night vision green screen effect. And what they do is they amplify the light, and they can cause artifacts. You can kind of see it here, right? They are rays that are not actually visible, but if you look at them through the starscope, you will see them. So it is possible that some of these artifacts explain and make sense when talking about statements like, we saw like a starlight object, right? If you would look at Sirius just above the tree line with atmospheric distortion and using the starscope, it might look like something that's bigger than it actually is. And then that combined with the fireball we spoke about, plus the other guy playing the prank, using his car and, creating all kinds of light effects. But then there's also a fourth factor that plays into this. And I'm sure you may have heard about this before, because the nearby Orfordness Lighthouse was operating that night. And there's various arguments floating around of why it could have not been the lighthouse. But if you look deeper into it, you'll figure out that they're actually all false. One big one is that there apparently is a shield around the back of the lighthouse that shields the view from the countryside. So the lighthouse only protrudes the light outwards towards the sea while not annoying the residents on the countryside. And that is true. But here's a picture of that exact lighthouse from the exact angle that Commander Halt was looking from. And you can see that the shield is there and it is blocking the residential areas that are over here on the left. But from the angle that we are looking at, the center of the lighthouse is exposed and we could see if there would be a bright, regularly occurring light there. Also, here's a picture from the pretty much exact location that Halt was claiming to witness the light. You can see the lighthouse. It is clearly visible, and especially at night, in a clear night, and it is winter, right? So there's not much lush greenery around here. You would be able to see this lighthouse and its illuminating light. What is also interesting in that regard is that Halt, while he made this voice recording, while being on the incident, he stated that the light he saw was in the same direction as the lighthouse and flashed roughly every 2 seconds, which is the exact flash rate of the Orfordness Lighthouse. So it's another coincidence. It's another light phenomenon that happened in that night. So if you ask me, can we explain what they saw? I think we can. The confirmed meteorite/fireball coming down in southern England during that exact time in the right direction. The prank from the sergeant, right, on his fellow man with using the car. The Sirius thing, where you have the combination of the starscope amplifying the light, Sirius above the horizon being amplified through the atmosphere, and then, last but not least, the lighthouse nearby. And there's so much going on that night that you kind of can imagine that causes some confusion. But what about the other witnesses? Halt was not alone, right? He was followed by several men, and they all gave their own witness testimony. The witness reports vary greatly and are extremely inconsistent. James Easton, who is a writer specializing in UFO books and stuff, as far as I'm aware, he was the guy who actually discovered all these witness reports in some kind of military case file that was published through the Freedom of Information Act, and he discovered it, and he stated that each individual account conflicts with the other. But most damning of all is the admission that the men knew they were chasing lighthouse beams from the Orfordness Lighthouse. Easton continued to say that one of Halt's men say that he touched an alien craft. Another man states nothing happened at all. Halt maintains a light out at sea is a UFO. Easton says he has identified that light as coming from the ship wash buoy, which is now out of service. I will link this site with all the witness reports down in the description as well. It actually really does make for an interesting read, and I'd recommend you to at least scavenge through it a little bit and see what you can find, because there are really interesting details in these. And you can find little diamonds like this one, which is a witness report from John Borrow. Okay, this is handwritten, and it states, it disappeared once we reached the farmer's house. We could see a beacon going around, so we went towards it, going around in the sense of like a lighthouse. We followed it for about 2 miles before we could see it was coming from a lighthouse. Then it continues, we just crossed a creek and blah, blah, blah. So he was admitting that even in that night, he realized that it was the lighthouse. We walked and ran for a good 2 miles beyond our vehicle until we got a good vantage point where we could determine what we were chasing was only a beacon of light off in the distance. John Burroughs has also implied that while he was supposedly under hypnosis, that he and Sergeant Peniston, also one of the witnesses who joined them at this excursion, were abducted by beings onto a UFO and spent 45 minutes there. Sergeant Jim Peniston, however, tells a completely different UFO story. In spite of supposedly sharing in Burroughs' UFO abduction, he claims that he touched the landed UFO and he received a message from it in the form of binary code, which he subsequently wrote down. However, did not tell anyone about it for 30 years. Okay, so this is the level of witness reports we're dealing with here. Commander Halt later allegedly also claimed that the Bentwater radar operators saw the object and it did 60 miles in 2 to 3 seconds, so enormous speed, and they were able to witness this. However, no radar operator ever confirmed that, or it was ever corroborated by other witnesses that that happened. In 2010, Jenny Randles, who first reported on the case and reported it to the London Evening Standard in 1981, and who also co-authored one of the first books on the case in 1984 called Sky Crash, A Cosmic Conspiracy, suddenly emphasized that she had doubt about her findings, right? So again, she wrote this book in 1984, it came out, and in 2010, so quite a few years later, she now came forward and said that she has doubts that the incident was actually caused by extraterrestrial visitors. And she says, this is a quote, "Whilst some puzzles remain, we can probably say that no unearthly craft were seen in Rendlesham Forest. We can also argue with confidence that the main focus of the events was a series of misperceptions of everyday things encountered in less than everyday circumstances." Nicely put. So looking at this as a bigger picture, you can start to see how there are just questions coming up and the credibility of this whole case and story falls apart. Obviously, a lot of information that I'm presenting here is not being shown to you guys when you watch the Rendlesham Forest UFO documentary. That only tells you what you want to hear, right? They wouldn't tell you these kinds of parts of the story because they put it into question and make you question the phenomenon as a whole. But what about the landing marks? The landing marks on the ground. So a little bit of background there. I think a day or two after this incident actually happened, Commander Halt and a few other journalists and police and so on went out into the woods, and they were able to locate the landing site and found indentations, a triangular shaped indentation, a pattern in the ground that Commander Halt claimed was caused by the spaceship they encountered. Now I could find these amazingly crisp images, photos that were taken on site in Rendlesham Forest in 1980 of these indentations. Now you can't see much, admittedly, but here in the second picture, and we only get 2, you can see a little bit. So there's an indentation here. There seems to be one here on the left-hand side. And it's not that it's like perfect circles, like 3 perfect circles that will clearly be coming from some kind of machinery or unearthly object. It looks more like scratches or something to me. Now, admittedly, these are not great photos, but these supposed landing marks were investigated and looked at by police and by foresters and were identified by both as rabbit diggings. So I don't think the questions around these forest floor indentations really hold up. But what about the radiation levels? Right? This is another part of the story that we always hear. They were measuring the radiation levels at the supposed landing site, and they were way above average. Is that true? No, actually that's not true. They recorded a 0.07 milliröntgens per hour on site, and in other regions around they detected 0.03 to 0.04, which is still considered in the parameters of normal background levels. So it is not true that they measured these incredibly high milliröntgen levels and radiations levels there on site. However, what could have led to this confusion is that Commander Halt actually misinterpreted his Geiger counter reading at the time. And that is how this whole rumor that they measured radiation on site may have started, by him telling people, wait, I measured the radiation and it was way off the charts, but he just misread his meter. So in conclusion, I think there's a lesson to learn here. And I think the lesson is that even if we have military personnel, people who are allegedly trained in observing military and light phenomenon, it doesn't mean that these people can't also make mistakes or misread events. The meteor had nothing to do with the lighthouse. The rabbit diggings had nothing to do with either of these things. It's just a bunch of coincidences, that's from what it looks like, at least from the outside analyzing this, that all occurred that night that led to the confusion that has now been amplified over decades into what the Rendlesham UFO incident has become. So don't automatically take what military personnel say as the ultimate truth because they are such trained observers. Don't jump to conclusions and don't make connections where there are none. Okay, I think that's the conclusion of this story, guys. So anyway, this is my breakdown of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then smash the like button. I would very much appreciate that. Maybe leave me a comment with your thoughts. I'm sure there are many other questions that I haven't answered in this video. If there are any, again, please drop them down in the comments and I'll see if we can answer them together. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you watching. Smash a like, subscribe, join our Discord, and I'll see you in the next one. I'm out. Bye.